Hello and welcome to English for Philosophy students. We are studying Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, and we are in the 9th lesson of rule number 7. And this is the 56th lesson overall. That's getting kind of up there. Last time, we finished a section that talked about how when humanity became awake, became conscious, stopped being animal and became human, we developed an understanding of the future and the past, and we developed an understanding of the value of sacrifice, giving up something in the present that would bring blessing in the future. And we developed a conscious understanding of pain and suffering. But by far, the worst thing we learned about was good and evil, and especially evil. When we learn how to suffer, it is only a small step to learn that you can make someone else suffer, and that is evil. And the story of this in the most ancient literature is the story of Cain and Abel. And Jordan Peterson referred to the story of Cain and Abel in the last discussion, and he will refer to it again in the discussion coming up. So, in the last section, the final point was that evil is a problem that was not solved by our early ancestors. The very story of Cain and Abel shows that humanity experienced evil as an insoluble problem. Even sacrifice, the sacrifice of righteous Abel, was not sufficient to overcome the evil of his brother Cain. So Abel is supposed to be the hero of the story, but he loses the battle. And symbolically, this shows that humanity experienced evil as actually more powerful than good. And evil was a problem without a solution. When humanity became more than animal. When the first man, Adam, emerged. So, the next section is subtitled Evil Confronted. That means evil head on, encountered, and even perhaps more than encountered, perhaps overcome. So a confrontation is a battle. We don't really know who will win. So let's read. Jesus was led into the wilderness, according to the story, to be tempted by the devil. Matthew 4:1. Okay, so this is introducing a story that was not mentioned before. If you know the Bible, then you know that the book of Matthew is one of the 4 Gospels The Gospels are the first 4 books in the New Testament. The New Testament is one of 2 books of the Bible. The Bible consists of Old Testament and New Testament. The Old Testament is the chronicles of the books, the papers of the Jewish people before Jesus. The New Testament is the papers, the documents of the early Christians, right after Jesus. And the first 4 books in the New Testament are 4 different biographies of Jesus, each one written by someone close to Jesus in time and geographical proximity. They consulted with eyewitnesses, and in some cases they themselves were the eyewitnesses of the life of Jesus. So Matthew is the first of the 4 biographies, and this is the chapter, so it would be chapter 4, verse 1, is where you find the phrase that Jesus was led into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. So chapter 4 is pretty early in the Gospel of Matthew. One of the first things recorded was this incident where Jesus was led into the wilderness. We don't know who led him, whether God led him, whether the devil led him, but in some sense he felt impelled to go into the wilderness, which was a desert near where he lived, for 40 days, to be tempted by the devil. And this occurred prior to his crucifixion. Actually, it was quite a bit prior. It was actually, prior means before. It was a long time before. It was not just immediately before. It was 3 years before his crucifixion. And in fact, it was prior to his public ministry. You get the feeling that maybe he was led into the wilderness to confront the devil as part of a process of deciding to abandon his former life as a carpenter, an ordinary citizen, and begin his public ministry as Messiah. So, Jesus was led into the wilderness, according to the story, to be tempted by the devil, Matthew 4:1, prior to his crucifixion. This is the story of Cain, restated abstractly. I want to underline this here. This is the story of Cain, restated abstractly. As I was reading this section in advance, it struck me that the entire section, for quite a while, consists of Jordan Peterson expanding on the tale or the simple story of Cain and Abel. Jordan Peterson is a psychologist, and this paragraph and the next, it sounds very psychological. Jordan Peterson is imagining and projecting what he thinks the most typical feelings and motivations a human being would have. He is projecting those onto Cain. So as we read this paragraph, keep in mind that all of this is not explicit in the story of Cain and Abel. The story is very simple. I will remind you right now of the simple story. All it says is, Cain, the older brother, and Abel, the younger brother, both brought sacrifices to the Lord from their labor. Cain's sacrifice was rejected by God, but Abel's sacrifice was accepted by God. No reason is given. Cain goes away or begins to go away angry. And God stops him and says, "Why are you angry? Be careful. Sin is crouching at your door. You are in danger of falling into sin." Cain leaves and goes and murders his brother Abel. And then God confronts Cain with the deed and banishes him to live in exile for the rest of his life and not to be able to farm the land. The land will no longer give crops to Cain. That's pretty much all the story says. So as we read this, realize that Jordan Peterson is expanding quite a lot in order to make Cain into every man, into an archetypical man with the motivations you might imagine if the entire paradigm of existence, according to Jordan Peterson, is true. Jordan Peterson has been building a paradigm, a construct of what existence means for this whole book, really. And if everything he says is true, then this is the reason Cain acted the way he did and the results of it. And Jordan Peterson is going to suggest that this type of experience is common to all of us, and that Jesus turned it all around and made it and did things the opposite way. So as we read, we'll see what Jordan Peterson sees in the archetypical figure of Cain, the bad guy of the story. So, first, I want to point out that Jordan Peterson is saying that the story of Jesus being led into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan is the story of Cain restated abstractly. So first he is going to show Cain, and then he is going to show Jesus, and he is going to show that the two stories have parallels and are sort of almost the same with a different outcome. So this is the story of Cain. So this is the story of Cain restated abstractly. Cain is neither content nor happy. I'm going to get myself a color. I think I'll take purple. Well, I think I'll take blue. No, sorry. Okay. Cain is neither content nor happy. He is not happy, as we have seen. He's working hard, or so he thinks, but God is not pleased. Okay, this "or so he thinks" is a disclaimer. From Cain's perspective, Cain is working hard. Cain thinks that Cain is working hard, but God does not agree. Cain thinks Cain is working hard, but God is not pleased. Earlier last week, we saw how angry it can make you if you have tried hard and still failed. If you didn't try, well, who cares? But if you tried and someone still rejected you, that hurts more. Meanwhile, Abel is, by all appearances, dancing his way through life. Okay, so meanwhile means at the same time that Cain is working hard, at the same time, Abel is dancing his way through life. We have in English a story of a hard-working ant and a grasshopper who dances his way through life. And the grasshopper looks at the ant working hard in the summer and mocks him and laughs at him and says, "You're stupid. The sun is shining. You should be enjoying it." And the ant just ignores him and puts away food. And then when the cold comes in the fall, the grasshopper knocks on the door of the ant's house and says, "Give me food. I'm hungry." And the ant says, You're stupid. You should be enjoying the cold. Go dance your way. I cannot spare my food to you." So dancing his way through life conjures the idea of someone who doesn't work. So again, this is Cain's perspective. It's not true of Abel. So, meanwhile, Abel is, by all appearances. That also is a disclaimer. A disclaimer is something that contradicts what's being said. By all appearances suggests that what you can see is not actually true. So, Abel is, by all appearances, but not really, dancing his way through life. Examples: his crops flourish. Women love him. This is not in the story. There is no hint of that in the story. Jordan Peterson is making a statement about men in general. You look at someone and he's rich and women love him, and worst of all, he's a genuinely good man. This makes people jealous. Jordan Peterson is showing how a black heart, an evil man, hates that which is good. Hates a good man more than they would hate an evil man. And also hates the success of the good man. Okay, so Abel, by all appearances, is dancing his way through life. Examples: his crops flourish, women love him, worst of all, he's a genuinely good man. Everyone knows it. He deserves his good fortune. All the more reason to envy and hate him. Things do not progress well for Cain. By contrast, and he broods on his misfortune like a vulture on an egg. Jordan Peterson is painting a picture of a bitter man who has a black heart, who is jealous of people who are successful and good and bright, and someone who sits and thinks about his own misfortune. Usually misfortune is something that happens to you through no fault of your own. But reading between the lines, we can see that this man, Cain, has no misfortune, no real misfortune. His problem is that he is not grateful. He is not thankful for the good in his life. He is jealous of others and unwilling to work to achieve what they have. I'm sure you know people like this. I hope you yourself are not this person. And if so, repent. Like a vulture on an egg. A vulture in English is an image that is very ugly. Vultures eat dead people. Vultures fly around when you are about to die and wait for you to die so they can eat you. And sometimes they might come and start eating you before you are dead. Vultures are pictures of death and decay. So a vulture on an egg is an interesting metaphor, because what would a vulture give birth to in its egg but another vulture, another piece of disgusting horribleness? The image of an egg usually is life and goodness, but not a vulture's egg. A vulture is brooding on something bad to give birth to something bad. This is the picture of Cain that Jordan is showing us. He strives in his misery to give birth to something hellish, and in doing so, enters the desert wilderness of his own mind. Remember, we are comparing this to Jesus being led into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And Jordan is saying that Cain is being tempted and led into a wilderness, a desert wilderness of his own mind in misery. He obsesses over his ill fortune, his betrayal by God. Remember, ill fortune is very similar to misfortune. Cain does not have any ill fortune. Ill fortune is when bad things happen to you through no fault of your own. Cain has no ill fortune. But he obsesses over imaginary ill fortune, imaginary grievances that make him angry and bitter and miserable. And it's all in his mind. His betrayal by God. So remember, God said, Cain, you're in danger. You need to do better. Repent. That's not betrayal. God is trying to help him. But he chooses to interpret that as, God betrayed me. I am a victim. So he obsesses. That means think and think and think constantly, round and round, on this type of thought that he is betrayed and that he's unlucky. He nourishes, hold on, he nourishes his resentment. I think I told you a story, the Indian story of the two dogs or wolves fighting in the heart of the man, a white wolf of goodness and a black wolf of evil, eternally fighting in the heart of a man. And the Indian boy said, which one wins? And the old brave said, whichever one he feeds. So it says here that Cain was feeding the resentment in his heart instead of feeding thoughts of gratefulness to God and thoughts of the goodness of God and positive thoughts. He was feeding and nourishing his resentment. Cain indulges in ever more elaborate fantasies of revenge. So when you indulge yourself, that means you give yourself a treat. Like maybe you indulge in some cookies, even though you're trying to lose weight. You're going to enjoy something for once. It's something you choose to do as an unusual treat, is an indulgence. Well, for Cain, what he indulges himself and enjoys doing is creating fantasies of revenge. In his mind, I'll do this to him, I'll do that to him to get back. This kind of thinking is part of the psychosis that is going on in Cain. And as he does so, his arrogance grows to Luciferian proportions. So arrogance is pride, a very ugly kind of pride. And it grows to Luciferian proportions. Lucifer is the angel of light who fell from heaven and became the devil. And the sin of Lucifer was, he said, I will be like God. And he fell and became the devil. So it says the arrogance of Cain became like that of Lucifer. So Cain can become like the devil. As he says to himself, I'm ill-used and oppressed. Ill-used means people are treating me wrong and badly, unfairly. I am a victim of the evil of others. People are mistreating me. I'm ill-used and oppressed, he thinks. This is a stupid, bloody planet. Bloody is just a word English people and apparently Canadians use as a bad. It just means bad. This is a bad planet. Existence sucks. Remember all that? Your creation sucks that we were talking about in previous lessons. He's thinking that way. It's leading to nihilism. So this is a stupid, bloody planet. As far as I'm concerned, it can go to hell. It's just a generic, typical curse. And with that, Cain encounters Satan in the wilderness, for all intents and purposes, and falls prey to his temptations. Okay, so the phrase, for all intents and purposes, means this thing happens, and it is just like this other thing in every essential way. For all intents and purposes means they are similar in every essential way. And what is it similar to? The story of Cain is similar to Jesus. The story of Cain's psychology as he walked away from God when God rejected his sacrifice and then ultimately murdered his brother. The psychology of Cain is, for all intents and purposes, probably just like what the story of Jesus going into the wilderness to encounter Satan and be tempted by Satan. So, at this point, as far as I'm concerned, it can go to hell. And with that, Cain encounters Satan. And with that phrase says, at this point in his thinking, he encounters Satan and is tempted. And falls prey to the temptation. That will be the difference with Jesus does not fall prey. Jesus does not fall. But Cain does fall. And he does what he can to make things as bad as possible, motivated by, in John Milton's imperishable words, so deep a malice to confound the race of mankind in one root, and earth with hell to mingle and involve, done all to spite the great Creator. So this poetry describes the motivation of Cain when he killed his brother. Jordan Peterson said that Cain is doing what he can to make things as bad as possible, to make things worse. John Milton says that he was motivated by so deep a malice. Malice is the desire to do evil to someone. Malice is the desire to hurt someone. And who does he want to hurt? God himself. So deep a malice to confound the race of mankind in one root, and earth with hell to mingle and involve. I think to confound the race of mankind in one root. I'm not sure I understand what that means. Confound can mean astonish and confuse, or it can mean sort of mix up and commingle, which is the sense of the second one. When he says, and earth with hell to mingle and involve. So earth was good. It was created good. But with Cain doing such evil, he was mingling hell with earth. That would be like taking your picnic lunch and putting dog poop in it. Done all to spite the great Creator. Spite is a form of evil that is very petty and small. If you can't do a big injury, do a small injury. Spit at someone. That's spite. Do an injury that does no good to you only because you want to hurt him. Spite. So actually Cain was destroying his own interests in the attempt to hurt God. That's what spite is. Cain turns to evil to obtain what good denied him. And he does it voluntarily, self-consciously, and with malice aforethought. Okay, so, darn, my thing keeps doing this to me. All right, so the phrase with malice aforethought is a legal term. If you are going to be convicted of a first-degree crime, you have to do the action with malice aforethought. Malice means you intended evil, and aforethought means you thought about it ahead of time. It was not in the heat of the moment because you were angry. It was something you plotted and thought about in advance, and with evil intent. That is malice aforethought. So, Cain turns to evil to obtain what good denied him. Question might be, what was he looking for? Maybe it was something like to be accepted and to feel good about himself and to feel powerful. I don't know what. Okay, so now we're going to the story of Jesus. Christ takes a different path. His sojourn in the desert is the dark night of the soul. A sojourn is a trip or a journey. In Cain's case, his sojourn in the wilderness was primarily psychological. It was going from being rejected by God to anger, to obsessing over your anger, to blaming others, to nourishing fantasies of revenge, finally to connecting with the devil to do as much damage as possible just to spite God. The whole process is his sojourn in the wilderness. Jesus's sojourn in the desert is the dark night of the soul, a deeply human and universal human experience. My understanding of the dark night of the soul is that it is a spiritual experience that was discussed by certain theologians and writers in church history, particularly St. John of the Cross, who wrote a book entitled The Dark Night of the Soul. And it is a time when your world seems very dark and black, and everything is going wrong, and you are alone, and God seems to be missing. You can't find God. It's an experience of the soul of being stripped. And according to, maybe this isn't what Jordan Peterson is talking about, I don't know. That's my understanding of what the phrase means. Jordan Peterson describes it as a deeply human and universal human experience. So when he says universal, I think that means everybody goes through it at some time or another. Maybe after the death of a loved one or something. I don't know. I didn't think the dark night of the soul was universal according to John of the Cross. So I don't know. Universal means everybody has it. It's the journey to that place each of us goes when things fall apart. So things fall apart means everything goes wrong. Friends and family are distant. Hopelessness and despair reign. And black nihilism beckons. So beckoning is this, it's a temptation. Black nihilism is something we do not need to go into, but it is a temptation when everything has fallen apart. Friends and family seem distant. Hopelessness and despair reign. And let us suggest, in testament to the exactitude of the story, 40 days and nights starving alone in the wilderness might take you exactly to that place. In the story of Jesus going into the wilderness to encounter the devil, it specifically says that Jesus fasted for 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness before he met the devil. So Jordan Peterson is suggesting, in testament to the exactitude of the story, in other words, since the story tells us it's 40 days, let's mention 40 days. Let's say that 40 days alone in the wilderness starving would definitely bring you to a place where nihilism might beckon and where you might meet the devil, at least psychologically. It is in such a manner that the objective and subjective worlds collide. Come crashing synchronistically together. So the subjective world is how you feel about things. The objective world is what's actually happening. And once you have fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, the two come crashing together at the same moment. 40 days is a deeply symbolic period of time. It echoes the 40 years the Israelites spent wandering in the desert after escaping and here, by the way, there's a mistake in our PDF. The next page here, this one here, is not the next page from here. I had to go to the paper copy and take photographs of the text that is missing. We're missing text here. So give me a second. I have to pick it up. So let's remind ourselves of what this is saying. 40 days is a deeply symbolic period of time, echoing the 40 years the Israelites spent wandering in the desert after escaping the Pharaoh of Egypt. The story of the Israelites, which is actually real history. The Hebrews, the Jews, were kept in slavery by the Egyptians for about 400 years. And then Moses, a historical figure, arose and led them away into the promised land. Unfortunately, although the promised land was only a 3-day walk from Egypt, it took them 40 years in the wilderness to get there. This is true. This happened. The reason was the people rebelled against God, and they refused his commandments. And God, made a vow that none of that generation would ever go into the promised land, not even Moses. Only 2 young men who hadn't sinned in the way the others had. And so for 40 years, the entire nation of Israel, 2 million people, camped in the wilderness. And every so often, they would move the camp to a new place. They were following a visible manifestation of God. In the day, it was a cloud, like kind of like a whirlwind, like a tornado, but without the wind. And at night, it was a pillar of fire. And whenever the cloud rose up, they broke the camp and the cloud would move and they would just follow it to a new campsite. And then they would rebuild the camp. And that went on for 40 years until the entire generation of sinners died. You should read about it. I believe it's in the book of Exodus. Anyway, the number 40 is a symbolic number to the Jews. Okay, so let's find the next text. So it says here, 40 days is a deeply symbolic period of time, echoing the 40 years the Israelites spent wandering in the desert after escaping the, this is supposed to, hold on. I tried this out. Here we go. Darn. Oh, I know. Here we go. You can't see it very well, but maybe you can see it a little. Make it fatter. Oh well. After escaping the tyranny of Pharaoh and Egypt, 40 days is a long time in the underworld of dark assumptions, confusion, and fear. 40 days for Jesus in the wilderness would be a long time in the underworld of dark assumptions, confusion, and fear. Long enough to journey to the very center, which is hell itself. So he is assuming that Jesus was wrestling mentally and emotionally and spiritually. Perhaps Jesus knew that if he gave up his probably happy life as a carpenter to go and take up the mantle of being the Messiah, that it would lead to the cross. He knew that. Plus also, it might be pretty uncomfortable getting there. So maybe he had to really wrestle. I don't know. Okay. A journey there to see the sights can be undertaken by anyone. Anyone, that is, who is willing to take the evil of self and man with sufficient seriousness. He's being a little light-hearted here. He's saying anyone can take this trip if you are willing to take the evil of yourself and of man with sufficient seriousness. You too can go see the devil. Sort of facetious. A bit of familiarity with history can help. A sojourn through the totalitarian horrors of the 20th century, with its concentration camps, forced labor, and murderous ideological pathologies, is as good a place as any to start. So if you want to plumb the depths of human evil, read the history of the 20th century. That, and some consideration of the fact that worst of the concentration camp guards were human. So the worst people in the story were actually human, all too human. So in other words, you have to think to yourself, not those Nazis were terrible, but I would have been terrible, maybe, if I had been in their position. They were human too. That's all part of making the desert story real again, part of updating it for the modern mind. After Auschwitz, said Theodor Adorno, student of authoritarianism, there should be no poetry. Actually, I think we need to stop here. I don't think we have time to go through the whole next paragraph. We can try to read it, and we'll probably pick up here next time. Let's just read it, though. After Auschwitz, said Theodor Adorno, student of authoritarianism, there should be no poetry. He was wrong, but the poetry should be about Auschwitz. In the grim wake of the last 10 decades of the previous millennium, the terrible destructiveness of man has become a problem whose seriousness self-evidently dwarfs even the problems of unredeemed suffering. And neither one of those problems is going to be solved in the absence of a solution of the other. This is where the idea of Christ's taking on the sins of mankind as if they were, his own, becomes key, opening the door to deep understanding of the desert encounter with the devil himself. Homo sum humani nihil me alienum puto, said the Roman playwright Terence. Nothing human is alien to me. Let's go back and talk about this a little bit, since we can do a few more minutes. Hold on. Where'd it go? Here we go. Sorry, this is so hard to see. There we go. I'm going to try red and see if that makes it easier to see. After Auschwitz, everybody knows that's the most infamous German concentration camp. Said Theodor Adorno, student of authoritarianism, there should be no poetry. So he is saying, poetry ends with Auschwitz. There can be no beauty after that. Evil has won. He was wrong, says Jordan Peterson, but the poetry should be about Auschwitz. In the grim wake of the last 10 decades, so in the wake of something means as soon as something ends, the thing that follows comes in the wake. So we are in the wake of the 20th century, because 20th century came first and then you have us. So in the grim wake, grim, just makes it sort of bad and evil. In the grim wake of the last 10 decades of the previous millennium. So the last 10 decades is 100 years. In the last 100 years of the previous 1,000 years, millennium is 1,000, the terrible destructiveness of man has become a problem whose seriousness self-evidently dwarfs even the problem of unredeemed suffering. So we have two problems: the terrible destructiveness of man. Where is it? The terrible destructiveness of man and the problem of unredeemed suffering. And neither of these problems is going to be solved in the absence of a solution to the other. So we need a solution to both. The problem of unredeemed suffering, like natural suffering, like tsunamis and hurricanes, and the problem of the evil of man. We need a solution to both of them. This is where the idea of Christ taking on the sins of mankind as if they were his own sins becomes key, opening the door to understanding of the desert encounter with the devil himself. So I have to say I don't really understand what he's saying, but maybe he'll explain it. He's saying the encounter of Jesus with the devil connects to this problem of unresolved suffering and evil. Nothing human is alien to me. Meaning Jesus experienced and came face to face with all the evil there is, natural and human. Jesus says, nothing human is alien to me. Okay, let's stop there, even though it's a bad place to stop because we don't really understand what we're talking about. But it is time to stop. So let me see if I can get this marked. And we're done. Well, I'll mark it in a minute. Oh, here we go. There we are. We'll start again next time right there. See you later.